Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Daily Bolt with your host, Dr. Jeff Tilley. Today's topic: Dorian ramps up the tropical season in a big way. Sit back and relax and enjoy today's Daily Bolt. So we are in Labor Day weekend 2019. It's been a few weeks since I've been able to do a podcast for you, for which I apologize. I was very much involved in an intensive teaching activity over the last 3 weeks, and it was difficult to find the time and the energy to get you a quality podcast, so I decided to wait until that teaching assignment was over. And as luck would have it, we now have a major hurricane to talk about in the form of Dorian. And many of you listening to this have probably already heard about Dorian and have been even watching some of the news and the media coverage about Dorian. And so, as is the case every tropical cyclone season, I usually chime in with my own comments and analysis, and we will end up doing that again this tropical season. Dorian is not the first named storm. It's been, up until this point, in terms of hurricane season storm energy, one of the metrics that we use. In other words, how many storms, how long do they last, and how strong are they? It has been maybe just a little bit below normal. We did have the one significant tropical storm affect the U.S. Gulf Coast in July, that being minimal Hurricane Barry, that managed to crack Category 1 status for a short period of time before making landfall in the central Gulf Coast, after which it began its usual, or rather the usual, decline in strength for a hurricane into a tropical storm due to increase in friction from the land surface, obstacles, mountains, and the fact that it's away from the main thermal engine driving tropical cyclones, warm ocean water. So, with all that preamble out of the way, now let's talk a little bit about Dorian. And right now, it's about 7:15 p.m. Pacific time, 10:15 p.m. Eastern time on August 31st, and Dorian is still moving to the west, roughly at about 8 or 9 miles per hour or so, and it's about 315 miles east of West Palm Beach, Florida, and substantially closer to the northwestern Bahamas. Its winds remain quite strong. It is a very strong Category 4 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 150 miles per hour, with some higher gusts. It does not have to be that much stronger to make it into Category 5 territory. The good news about Dorian is that it's still, in terms of its strongest winds, a relatively compact hurricane. The tropical storm force winds go out to a significant distance, all the way out to about 105 miles from the center of the eye. The hurricane force winds extend outward only about 30 miles. That's still significant. It's not teeny tiny in terms of hurricanes as they go, but it is not a super large area of extremely strong winds. And right now, most of those really strong winds are not affecting that much in the way of land areas. The northwestern Bahamas, however, are directly in the sights of Dorian and are likely to experience significant increase in winds overnight and through the day tomorrow. And I would not be surprised to see some significant damage in some of the islands of the northwestern Bahamas. Up until this point, Dorian has been relatively kind to land areas. Damage in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and other islands of the Caribbean has been relatively minor. I won't say totally minor, but it's more limited than would normally be the case for many hurricanes that come as close to those islands as Dorian actually did. So, in that respect, Dorian has not been as devastating a hurricane as many other hurricanes in recent years have been that have crossed through the Caribbean. It helps that Dorian was not nearly as strong of a hurricane when it was passing close to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and the other Caribbean islands as those other hurricanes were. It was maybe a weak Category 2 and starting to grow to a Category 3 as it left the Virgin Islands and started to approach the Bahamas. The real intensification has been occurring over the last day or so as Dorian has been moving over waters that are increasingly warm, and it will continue to move over waters that are increasingly warm over the next two days or so as it crosses the northwestern Bahamas and approaches the U.S. southeast coast. There are some very warm ocean temperatures in place there right now. And the vertical wind shear, which I've talked about in previous podcasts as being one factor that can affect whether a hurricane intensifies, maintains intensity, or decays, that wind shear is going to be fairly low over the next 2 days as well. So there are multiple factors that tend to favor intensification into a Category 5 storm. However, it may not maintain that intensity for a long duration before fluctuations occur. Another thing that we've talked about in previous podcasts is that hurricanes, as their inner eyes develop due to a ring of very strong thunderstorms surrounding the eye, they go through natural cycles of formation of those thunderstorms and decay. And you even have the center of where the thunderstorms are strongest shift. And you see effectively a breakdown of the eye structure. And it is ultimately replaced with a new eye that forms at roughly the original intensity. So these so-called eye wall replacement cycles, once a hurricane starts becoming into major hurricane status, and particularly the stronger it gets, the more we tend to see some of these eye wall replacement cycles over time. So it is very likely that the intensity of Dorian will fluctuate up and down a bit. So right now it's sort of it's near the borderline of a Category 4, Category 5 hurricane. It may cross over into Category 5 hurricane territory for a while, have an eye wall replacement cycle and weaken, which is typically what happens as these cycles occur, and then re-intensify and then re-weaken again. And so it remains to be seen just how much change in intensity from the current average wind speeds of about 150 miles per hour really occurs while the center of the hurricane is still over this very warm water in a very low wind shear environment. It'll be kind of an interesting thing to see. Every hurricane is a little bit different, and we can predict that there will be eye wall replacement cycles, but we can't necessarily predict exactly how they will unfold. And even our best computer models, while they can predict the fact that a cycle will occur, they don't necessarily do very well on the timing of these cycles, how long they last, how much of a fluctuation in intensity actually occurs. And so that brings us to the future. One problem with Dorian right now is that because it's in a relatively low shear environment and because the steering currents that we've talked about before in the past have a tendency to be extremely weak in such environments, this leads to a significant amount of uncertainty even in the short-term track. We know from a consensus of the models that what will happen with Dorian is what happens with virtually all Atlantic hurricanes, is this phenomenon called recurvature, where the tropical storm, the hurricane, will move westward and then gradually turn northwestward and northward and get swept into the mid-latitude westerlies and then be forced to travel more northeastward. So all the models predict recurvature. The question is, how far west will Dorian get before recurvature occurs? And there's still a significantly wide spread even in the next 12 to 24 hours, which means the spread of solutions for recurvature is even larger, with the guidance envelope taking the track perhaps as far inland as Ocala, Florida, and west of Savannah, Georgia, through Columbia, South Carolina, and Charlotte and Greensboro on the western side, all the way well offshore, with kind of a consensus track staying not super close to shore, but certainly close enough that storm surges, flooding, rainfall will impact a substantial part of the southeastern U.S. coast, all the way from potentially Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, all the way up as far north as the Hampton Roads area of Virginia over the next 5 days. So Dorian bears watching, particularly in the next 12 to 24 hours, to see just how far west it goes and exactly when it starts to make more of a northwestward turn. That will be the key as to how much of the U.S. coast Dorian actually impacts, how much of the southeastern U.S. mainland it impacts, or whether it will be mostly a nuisance farther out into the Atlantic and just provide some high surf. A lot of things to be watching for over the next 2 days, so it makes it a very interesting Labor Day weekend. And since my intensive teaching assignment is over, I will be able to keep an eye on it for you, and we will definitely have regular podcasts over the next few days and hopefully continuing on then through the fall. For tonight, that's it for this edition of the Daily Bolt. I'm Dr. Jeff Tilley, and I hope you're having a pleasant weekend.